The observation deck of the Kethanar research station hummed with an otherworldly silence. Commander Vexthor stood with her claws folded across her chest, her sleek leopard-like body casting long shadows against the glowing blue walls. Her silver-striped fur rippled as she turned to face the security officer who had just entered the room. "Sir, we have apprehended the intruder," the guard reported, his voice firm and professional. His own spotted coat glimmered under the artificial lights as he waited for instructions. Vexthor's ears perked up with curiosity. An intruder was rare on this station. The Kethanar had built this research facility on the edge of their territory, far away from any known habitable worlds. They prided themselves on their security and advanced detection systems. For someone to slip past all their defenses was unusual, perhaps even concerning. "Bring him to me," Vexthor commanded, and the guard immediately nodded and left the room. Minutes later, security officers returned, escorting a small, fragile creature between them. David was a human, a species the Kethanar had only read about in their archives. He had disheveled brown hair that stuck up in odd directions, and his clothes were torn and dirty from his journey through the station's ventilation shafts. His eyes were wide with fear and confusion, darting around the room as if trying to understand where he was and what would happen to him next. "His name is David," one of the guards reported, clicking his claws nervously against the metallic floor. "We found him near the restricted sector, attempting to access our primary database terminals. He was using a small handheld device that we do not recognize." David held up his hands defensively, a nervous grin spreading across his face. Wait. I just wanted to understand your star charts. I meant no harm at all. I was just curious about your navigation systems. My ship crashed on a moon nearby, and I was trying to find a way home. I did not mean to break into anything important." Vexthor studied the small human carefully. She had never seen a human before in person, only in recordings and pictures. They were indeed much smaller and more fragile than the Kethanar. Their bodies lacked the muscular build and natural weapons that the Kethanar possessed. Yet there was something in David's eyes that fascinated her. He seemed genuinely sorry for what he had done, and his explanation, while rambling and disorganized, made some sense. "His story is consistent with what we found," another guard added. "There is indeed a damaged spacecraft on the third moon. It matches human design patterns." Vexthor's ears flattened against her head. The human was babbling incoherently, his gestures wild and uncontrolled. He waved his arms around while speaking, making strange expressions with his face. To the Kethanar, who valued precision, logic, and controlled movements, David appeared almost ridiculous. His behavior was erratic and unpredictable. Clearly, this specimen represented everything the Kethanar civilization believed about humans: primitive, chaotic, foolish, and desperately uncivilized. "You broke into a restricted military research facility," Vexthor said coolly, her golden eyes narrowing as she examined David. "You accessed our secure databases without authorization. This is a serious violation of our security protocols." David's face went pale. "I am sorry. I was desperate. My ship's communication system is broken, and I needed to send a distress signal. I did not think anyone would be here. I thought this was just an old research station abandoned long ago." The guards began to move toward David, ready to take him away. But Vexthor raised a hand, stopping them. She found the human's panic somewhat amusing. He was so clearly afraid, so obviously out of his depth. The commander made a decision that would alter the course of history, though she did not know it at the time. "Take him to the holding cell in Section 7, Vexthor commanded. "I want him studied. The Kethanar have minimal knowledge about the human species. This creature may provide valuable research data. Perhaps we can learn something from examining him, even if he is primitive and foolish." The guards nodded and began escorting David away. As they led him down the long corridors of the research station, David called out desperately, "Please? I promise I will cooperate. I will tell you anything you want to know. Just please do not hurt me." His voice echoed through the metal hallways as they dragged him toward his prison. The other Kethanar workers they passed glanced at the small human with expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust. None of them imagined that this small, frightened creature would soon become the most important individual to ever set foot on their station. In her office, Vexthor sat back in her chair and reviewed the security footage of David's capture. She watched as he stumbled through the corridors, occasionally bumping into walls because he did not know where he was going. She observed how he tried to hide when the security patrols came near, using ineffective hiding spots that were obvious to anyone looking. The commander shook her head slowly. Humans were indeed foolish creatures. How had they even managed to develop space travel? Yet something about David intrigued her. Perhaps it was the way he tried to explain himself so earnestly, even knowing he had been caught. Perhaps it was the desperate hope in his eyes that he might survive this encounter. Whatever it was, Vex Thor felt certain that keeping David alive for study was the right choice. She could never have predicted that David would teach her species something so profound that it would forever change the Kethanear civilization. She could never have known that the foolish human she had just arrested would become the bridge between two worlds, the catalyst for a new age of discovery and cooperation. For now, David sat alone in his holding cell, staring at the glowing walls and wondering what terrible fate awaited him. He did not know that his greatest adventure was only just beginning. 3 days had passed since David was placed in the holding cell. The Kethanear had provided him with basic food and water, though the food tasted strange and bitter to his human tongue. He spent most of his time sitting on the cold metal floor, staring at the glowing blue walls and wondering if he would ever see Earth again. The cell was small and lonely, with only a single window of transparent material that looked out into a corridor where Kethanear guards occasionally walked past. On the morning of the 4th day, a different guard came to his cell. This one was smaller than the others, and her movements were more graceful and deliberate. She had a scientist's demeanor rather than a warrior's presence. Her name, he would later learn, was Dr. Kalina, the lead scientist of the entire research station. "Come with me, human," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I have something I wish to show you." David hesitated, unsure if this was a trick or a genuine invitation. But after spending days in isolation, he was desperate for any kind of interaction. He followed Kalina through the winding corridors of the station, past laboratories and observation decks, until they arrived at a large chamber filled with screens and complex equipment. Kalina gestured for David to sit at a terminal. On the screen in front of him appeared a series of mathematical symbols and equations that looked absolutely baffling. The symbols were unlike anything he had ever seen before. They seemed to twist and flow in ways that defied normal mathematical notation. There were curves and spirals, lines that connected in impossible ways, and numbers that did not seem to follow any pattern he could recognize. "This is the Kethanear unified equation," Kalina explained, her golden eyes watching David carefully. "For 300 years, our greatest minds have tried to solve this problem. We have computers more powerful than anything your species has ever created. We have mathematicians who have dedicated their entire lives to this single equation. Yet no solution has been found." David stared at the screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. He studied the equation for several minutes, completely absorbed in the challenge. Then he did something unexpected. He asked for a piece of material to write on and a marking implement. Kalina, curious about what the human was planning, provided him with what looked like a digital tablet and a stylus. To her absolute amazement, David began drawing frantically on the tablet. He sketched diagrams and charts, drawing lines and arrows that seemed to have no logical order. He wrote notes in his own language, muttering to himself as he worked. His approach was completely different from anything the Kethanear had ever attempted. "What if you approached it backwards?" David suddenly said aloud, looking up from the tablet with excitement in his eyes. "What if the answer is not in finding the solution but in redefining what the problem actually is? What if the equation is asking the wrong question?" Kalina tilted her head, her ears perking up with interest. She had never heard such a suggestion before. The Kethanear had always assumed that the equation was correct as it stood. The problem must lie in their ability to solve it, not in the equation itself. David continued working for the next several hours. He filled multiple tablets with sketches and notes. He asked Kalina questions about the historical context of the equation, about who had originally created it, and what they had been trying to accomplish. He wanted to understand not just what the equation said, but why it had been created in the first place. As he worked, David's approach became clearer. He was thinking in patterns that the Kethanear had never considered. He was making what appeared to be illogical leaps, connecting pieces of information that seemed completely unrelated. Yet somehow, these wild connections were leading somewhere. His methodology was chaotic and unpredictable, yet it was producing results. After nearly 8 hours of continuous work, David suddenly stopped. His eyes widened and a smile spread across his face. He turned to Kalina with a look of triumph. "I think I have it," he said breathlessly. "The equation works if you think of it this way." He drew a completely new framework on the tablet, showing how the original equation could be reorganized and reconceived from an entirely different angle. It was as if he had taken a puzzle that had been approached from every conventional direction and had simply turned it sideways, revealing a solution that had been hidden all along. Kalina stared at David's work in absolute disbelief. She checked his calculations using the station's most powerful computers. Within minutes, the verification came back. David's solution was correct. Absolutely, completely correct. 300 years of unsolved mathematics had been solved by a human in 8 hours using nothing but intuition and creative thinking. The scientist's hands began to tremble. She had never felt anything like the emotion that was flooding through her body. It was shock, certainly, but also something deeper. It was the realization that everything she thought she knew about problem-solving was incomplete. The Kethanar had perfected logic and calculation, but they had missed something essential. How did you do this? Kalina asked, her voice filled with wonder and confusion. David shrugged modestly. I just looked at it differently. I'm not as smart as your computers, but maybe that is the point. Your computers think in straight lines. I do not know how to explain it. I just see connections that are not obvious. Kalina realized in that moment that David was not foolish at all. He was something far more valuable. He represented a way of thinking that the Kethanar had forgotten, a capability that their advanced civilization had somehow lost in its pursuit of perfect logic. She immediately reported David's breakthrough to Commander Vexthor. Within hours, news of the humans' achievement began spreading through the research station like wildfire. The Kethanar, for the first time in their advanced history, began to wonder if perhaps their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. The news of David's mathematical breakthrough spread through the Kethanar research station like lightning traveling through a dark sky. Within hours, every scientist, engineer, and administrator knew that a small human had accomplished what their greatest minds could not. The reaction was mixed. Some felt curiosity and wonder. Others felt embarrassment and doubt. A few felt something closer to fear. Commander Vexthor sat in the council chamber, surrounded by the most important leaders of the Kethanar civilization. There was Sorvax, an ancient elder with battle scars crossing his silver fur, who had served the Kethanar for over 200 years. There was Minister Kexran, who oversaw all scientific research across their entire territory. There was General Tarvax, the military commander who controlled the station's security forces. All of them had come to discuss the impossible situation before them. Show us the data again, Sorvax commanded, his voice steady but filled with weight and authority. Dr. Kalina activated the holographic display, and the equation appeared in 3 dimensions above the council table. She showed them David's original approach, then his breakthrough solution. She explained, step by step, how the human had managed to solve the problem that had defeated Kethanar mathematicians for 3 centuries. Minister Kexran's tail swished back and forth nervously. This is impossible, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. We have tested this human. His cognitive ability should be inferior to ours. Our brain scans show that human neural structures are less complex than Kethanar neural structures. How can he achieve something we cannot? Perhaps, Kalina said carefully, the difference is not in complexity but in structure. The human mind operates differently. It makes connections that our logic-based thinking cannot make. It asks questions that we would never think to ask because they seem illogical to us. General Tarvex leaned forward, his claws scratching against the metal table. What you are suggesting is that this human possesses a cognitive advantage over us. This concerns me greatly. If humans have abilities we do not understand, they could pose a threat to our security. Sorvax raised a hand, silencing the general. The ancient elder's eyes were thoughtful and distant, as if he was looking into the past while considering the present. I remember, he said slowly, when the Kethanar were young as a species. We were creative then. We questioned everything. We made mistakes, but from those mistakes came innovations. As we became more advanced, as our logic became more perfect, we stopped questioning. We became certain that there was only one right way to think, only one correct approach to problems. He paused, his gaze settling on Kalina. You are suggesting that this human has reminded us of something we had forgotten? Yes, Kalina replied. The human thinks in ways that seem chaotic and illogical to us. But this chaos allows him to see solutions that our orderly minds cannot perceive. It is as if we have been trying to solve a puzzle by following a single rigid pattern, and he simply picked up the puzzle and turned it sideways. Minister Kexran stood up from his seat, his agitation evident in his jerky movements. This is absurd. We are the most advanced civilization in this region of space. Our technology surpasses that of 100 human species. Our mathematics is perfect. Our engineering is flawless. And you want us to believe that a primitive human can teach us something valuable? It is not about what is primitive and what is advanced, Kalina said firmly. It is about what is different. The human sees the world through different eyes. His species has evolved under different conditions. They have developed different ways of solving problems because they had to. They could not rely on pure logic alone. They had to be creative. They had to improvise. General Tarvex stood up as well. I recommend we increase security around this human. If his cognitive abilities are truly unique, we must ensure that he cannot escape or communicate with the outside universe. Such an advantage cannot be allowed to reach our enemies. But Sorvax shook his head slowly. The ancient elder's expression was sad, as if he was mourning something. No, he said quietly. I do not think the human is a threat. I think the human is a mirror. And what we see reflected in that mirror troubles us because we do not like what we have become. The council chamber fell silent. Everyone understood what the elder was saying. The Kethanar had achieved technological perfection, but in doing so, they had lost something essential. They had perfected logic at the expense of imagination. They had valued order at the cost of creativity. They had become so focused on doing things the right way that they had forgotten there might be many different ways to do things. What are you suggesting? Kexran asked, his voice quieter now. I suggest, Sorvax said, that we ask this human to help us. Not as a prisoner or a specimen for study but as a partner. We can give him our computational power and our advanced knowledge. He can give us back our ability to think differently. Together, we might achieve things that neither species could accomplish alone. General Tarvex's ears flattened. This is dangerous. We know nothing about human intentions or reliability. No, Sorvax agreed. But we know something about our own limitations now. And that knowledge is more valuable than any weapon or technology. For the first time in centuries, the Kethanar have encountered a perspective that genuinely challenges us. We can respond with fear or we can respond with wisdom. The elder looked at each member of the council in turn. I vote that we extend an offer to the human. An offer of collaboration. An offer of mutual benefit. Let us see if the Kethanar are wise enough to learn from those we once considered foolish. One by one the council members voted. The decision was unanimous. David would no longer be a prisoner. He would become something far more important to the future of the Kethanar civilization. He would become a teacher, a bridge between two worlds, a living reminder that strength sometimes comes from unexpected sources. In his holding cell, David did not yet know that his fate had changed forever. But soon, very soon, he would be called upon to help reshape an entire civilization. David was sleeping on the hard metal bench in his holding cell when the door suddenly opened. The bright light from the corridor flooded in, and he jolted awake, his heart racing with fear. He had been imprisoned for 5 days now, and each day had brought new uncertainty about what would happen to him next. Would they execute him? Would they send him back to Earth? Would they keep him locked away forever in this cold metal prison? Commander Vexthor entered the cell alone. This was unusual. Every other time guards had come to his cell, they had brought at least 2 armed soldiers with them. But now the commander stood before him with no weapons drawn, her golden eyes calm and thoughtful. David scrambled to his feet, unsure whether to be hopeful or terrified. Come with me, Vexthor said simply. We need to talk. David followed the commander through the corridors of the research station. They walked past laboratories where Kethanar scientists were working, past observation decks where the vast expanse of space stretched out in all directions. Finally, they arrived at a large chamber that looked like some kind of office or meeting room. The walls were smooth and white, and a single large window displayed the stars beyond. Vexthor gestured for David to sit at a large table. She sat across from him, her massive form making David feel even smaller and more vulnerable than usual. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the commander began to talk. I have been studying the reports about your accomplishment, Vexthor said carefully. You solved our unified equation in 8 hours. Our best mathematicians have worked on this problem for 300 years without success. This is remarkable. David nodded nervously. He was still not sure why the commander was telling him this. I was just trying to help, he said quietly. I did not mean to offend anyone or cause trouble. You did not offend us, Vexthor replied. You surprised us. There is a difference. Your solution has caused our leadership to reconsider many assumptions about human capabilities and, more importantly, about the limitations of our own civilization. She paused, studying David's face carefully. I have a proposal for you. But first, you must understand what I am offering and what I am asking of you in return. David felt his mouth go dry. This sounded serious. What kind of proposal? He asked cautiously. The Kethanar civilization has reached a point where we are very advanced but also very limited, Vexthor began. We can calculate and compute better than any species in the galaxy. Our technology is superior. Our military is powerful. But we have become trapped in one way of thinking. We approach all problems the same way. We have forgotten how to imagine new possibilities. She leaned forward slightly. Your species, on the other hand, is less advanced technologically, but you possess something we lack. You can think in ways that we cannot. You can see solutions that are not obvious. You can ask questions that challenge our assumptions. This is what you demonstrated with the equation. What are you asking me to do? David asked, though he was beginning to understand. I am asking you to stay here, Vexthor said. Not as a prisoner but as a consultant. Work with our scientists. Help us reimagine our technological framework. Help us solve problems that have plagued us for centuries. In exchange, we will give you resources, protection, and comfort. Your species will receive benefits as well. We will provide technology to human colonies. We will establish trade agreements. Your people will no longer be considered primitive and insignificant. David's heart raced. This was an incredible opportunity, but it also felt like a trap. He had learned during his time on Earth that nothing in life was ever free or simple. There were always strings attached. What happens if I refuse? David asked, his voice steady despite his fear. Vexthor's expression did not change. Then you will be treated fairly and respectfully. We will repair your ship and allow you to return to your home. However, your species will remain on our watch list. You will be observed, monitored, and contained. Humans will not be allowed to expand beyond your current territory. You will be treated as a species requiring supervision. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth. Somewhere out there were his family and friends. But he also understood what the commander was offering him. An opportunity to change everything. A chance for humanity to step onto the galactic stage as equals rather than primitives. I have conditions, David said, turning back to face Vexthor. The commander's ears perked up. You are in no position to make demands, human. You are my prisoner. I know, David said. But you would not be here talking to me if you did not believe I had value. You need me. And because you need me, I have leverage. I want to negotiate. Vexthor remained silent for a moment. Then, to David's surprise, a small smile appeared on her face. It was the first time he had seen any expression of emotion from the alien commander. Very well, she said. State your conditions. First, David said, I want protection for all human colonies within 50 light-years of this station. No invasion, no military intervention, no hostile action of any kind. Your people must treat humans with respect. Acceptable, Vexthor replied. Second, David continued, I want a human ambassador on your council. Not as a guest or an observer but as an equal voting member. Humans should have a voice in decisions that affect us. Vexthor hesitated at this one, but after a moment she nodded. This will require approval from the High Council, but I believe it can be arranged. Third, David said, I want genuine technology exchange. Not gifts or charity but real partnership. Our scientists will share human innovations, and your scientists will share Kethanear technology. We will work together as equals. Agreed, Vexthor said. And is there anything else? David thought for a moment. Yes, he said. I want to call my family. I want to tell them that I am alive and that I am going to help build something great here. I do not want them worrying about me. Vexthor stood up. This can be arranged. You will be given access to communication equipment. But your message will be monitored for security purposes. That is fair, David said. Vexthor extended her clawed hand toward David. Then we have an agreement, David of Earth. Welcome to the Kethanear research station as our honored colleague, not our prisoner. David hesitated only briefly before shaking her hand. His life had just changed forever. 6 months had passed since David first shook Commander Vexthor's hand in that office overlooking the stars. The research station had transformed completely. What was once a place of isolation and secrecy had become a bustling center of collaboration and innovation. Humans and Kethanear worked side by side in laboratories, sharing ideas and building technologies that neither species could have created alone. David stood in the grand chamber of the Kethanear capital city, a massive structure carved from crystal and metal that seemed to glow with inner light. The chamber was filled with representatives from both species. There were human scientists, engineers, and diplomats. There were Kethanear military commanders, government officials, and researchers. They had all gathered for a historic moment. The formal signing of the alliance treaty between Earth and the Kethanear civilization. Ambassador Elena stood beside David. She was a brilliant human diplomat with dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She had been sent from Earth 3 months ago to represent humanity in the negotiations. Elena had quickly proven herself to be just as creative and insightful as David, and together they had negotiated terms that would benefit both species for generations to come. "Are you nervous?" Elena whispered to David as they watched the ceremony preparations. "Terrified," David admitted with a small smile. "I was arrested as a prisoner 5 months ago. Now I am helping reshape galactic politics. It is a lot to process." Elena squeezed his shoulder. "You have earned this moment. Everyone here knows what you have accomplished." Sorvax, the ancient Kethanar elder, approached them. His movements were slower than they had been 6 months ago, but his eyes still burned with intelligence and purpose. He had become one of David and Elena's strongest supporters on the Kethanar Council. "Are you ready?" the elder asked. "As ready as I will ever be," David replied. The ceremony began with traditional Kethanar music, a series of harmonic tones that seemed to vibrate through the very air itself. Then came human music, played by Earth musicians who had traveled across space for this historic occasion. The combination of the two musical traditions was strange but beautiful, creating something entirely new. Commander Vex Thor stood at the center of the chamber, holding a crystalline document that contained the treaty in multiple languages and formats. She placed it on a pedestal of light, and David and Elena approached it together. They each added their signatures, using devices that recorded their biological information alongside their written names. When it was complete, the entire chamber erupted in celebration. Kethanar officials roared their approval, a sound like thunder that echoed through the chamber. Human diplomats cheered and applauded. Scientists from both species embraced each other, some of them crying with joy at the significance of the moment. Sorvax approached David after the official ceremony had concluded. The ancient elder's expression was calm and thoughtful as it always was, but there was something deeper in his eyes now. Something that looked like peace. "You were arrested as a fool," Sorvax said, his voice quiet but carrying weight. "You came to us as a prisoner, someone we believed was primitive and worthless. But you have taught us something far more valuable than any technology or mathematical breakthrough." David waited, listening carefully to what the elder had to say. "You have taught us," Sorvax continued, "that strength does not come from perfection. Strength comes from diversity of thought. For centuries we Kethanar believed that to be strong, we had to be perfect. We had to have the best logic, the most advanced technology, the most powerful military. But we were wrong." The elder looked around the chamber at all the humans and Kethanar working together. "Your kind brings something to us that we had lost. You bring imagination. You bring the ability to ask new questions. You bring the courage to try things that seem illogical but might work anyway. This is real strength." Elena placed a hand on David's shoulder. "And you have taught humanity something as well," she said to Sorvax. "You have shown us that wisdom and calculation and long-term planning are not weaknesses. The combination of human creativity and Kethanar logic is creating something we could never have imagined." Over the following weeks, collaborative teams began forming throughout both civilizations. Human creative problem solvers worked alongside Kethanar computational experts. Together they tackled problems that had seemed unsolvable. They redesigned medical systems using human intuition combined with Kethanar precision. They created new propulsion systems by blending human experimental approaches with Kethanar mathematical frameworks. They developed art and music and literature that combined both species' perspectives and sensibilities. News of the alliance spread through the galaxy like ripples on a pond. Other species heard about the unlikely partnership between humans and the Kethanar. They learned about how a small human had been arrested and had ultimately transformed an entire civilization. Some species wanted to join the alliance. Others watched carefully, trying to understand what this new partnership meant for the balance of power in the galaxy. One evening, David stood on an observation deck of the Kethanar capital, looking out at the stars. Elena joined him there, and they stood together in comfortable silence for a long moment. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked. "Your ship crashed, you were arrested, you were imprisoned. Do you wish things had been different?" David considered the question carefully. "No," he said finally. "I was supposed to crash here. I was supposed to be arrested. Everything that seemed like a disaster at the time was actually leading me toward this. Toward something greater than I could have imagined." "The Kethanar believed they had everything figured out," Elena said thoughtfully. "They thought they were perfect. But they were incomplete without us. And we were incomplete without them," David added. "That is what real partnership means. It is not about one side being superior. It is about both sides becoming more than they were alone. In the distance, new construction was beginning on a joint research facility that would be staffed equally by humans and Kethanar. It would be a symbol of the new age that was beginning, an age of cooperation and shared discovery. What had started with an arrest had become the foundation of something beautiful and unprecedented. The foolish human and the advanced aliens had found in each other not enemies or inferiors, but partners and teachers. And together they were creating a future that would benefit both their species for generations to come.